Good evening, guys. Welcome to our second session in a bit more positive mode, hopefully. Thank you all for understanding last night, unfortunate circumstances. And we have yesterday's session behind closed doors ready to go, so we'll release that this evening. So I hope you guys enjoy this one. We've got two great speakers. We've got Niall Berry will be up first, current under-18 men's assistant coach, also Portlaoise Panthers head coach, and also silver medalist women's that were very successful on their home soil a number of years back, and he's going to be great for us. And then we have Hannah Thornton, who's spreading like wildfire. She's been so good lately, and with her next generation health, and she will talk to us about nutrition in sport, and hope you guys enjoy. So as I said, we'll send out yesterday's session this evening. It was really good. Kieran Dunn and Erin Bracken both integrated really well, and I would invite you all to pose your questions in the sidebar of your camera on your webinar, and I will pose them as they come across to Niall and Hannah throughout the session. So best to enjoy it, and best luck to Niall and Hannah. So Niall, if you want to take it away.
Cheers. Let me get this up now.
I'll just make you presenter.
Sure.
There we go.
Excellent. All right, is that coming up there, Paul?
No, you're good. I see it. Yeah, you're all good.
Good. All right, so you see it, everybody should see it. All right, so excellent. All right, so I'm going to do my presentation here on building a competitive culture. I don't think it's right to start with competitive culture in the title and not show those two men that are up on screen. There's a few little quotes that are on that just kind of identify who they are and what it means to be a competitor from an athlete's eyes. Now, there's a secondary focus as to why they're the first screen I showed is that the second screen for me is hold on a second, let me get this right. That presentation, let me just fix that. There we go. All right, so the second screen is about the man that coached him. And the man that coached him, Phil Jackson, as you see here, he states that the greatness of Michael Jordan was his competitive drive, but also the weakness of Michael Jordan was his competitive drive. And that, to me, formulates the questions about the mentality of coaching versus the mentality of playing. And I think as coaches, and there are probably players and coaches that are on this seminar, but as coaches, we need to understand the difference between the mentality of playing and versus the mentality of coaching, and what our roles are in facilitating developing a culture of competitiveness rather than just being competitive.
The slides aren't showing, unfortunately.
Okay. So it's.
There we go. Yeah, you're good. Yeah, you're good.
Can I show it like this?
Yeah, you're good. Yeah. Show it like that. That's
okay,
perfect.
so, all right. Let me see if I can get it. All right. So tell me if this moves, Paul. Is that moving for you?
No. We had the same issue with Erin last night. So if you want to click on the slides down the right, there we go. I think we're good. Move that slide.
Okay. So what I want to get animations in here as well, though. So is this moving?
Yeah, that one moved. Now we're on the building a competitive culture. Back to the start, I think. Yeah, we're good. Second one. Yeah.
All right. So now we should have Michael Jordan on the screen.
Correct.
Okay. And now we should have Tom Izzo.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So I'll move a little bit slower through it. So I apologize for that. So the mentality of being the difference in mentality of being a coach from being a player. As we can see in Michael Jordan's eyes there, the mentality of being a player is very much focused on success, focused on what you're trying to achieve, focused on the task at hand, and very almost blinkered, one-sided. Whereas a coach, to create a competitive environment, needs to create a competitive environment for everybody, needs to create an environment that's conducive with everybody being their best self and being competitive, and then also fostering that competitive mindset, almost embracing it, almost being part of it, but at the same time being able to detach from it in order to play their role in facilitating that environment. So for example, here's a list of players that were probably top athletes and never made the jump to professional coaching at a high level. And the reason, in my opinion, is specifically because they weren't able to change that mindset. They weren't able to create that culture that they were raised in and that culture that they embodied as a player. And to create that culture, you need to be able to detach from your own personal emotions and feelings and facilitate your players reaching their levels of competitiveness. And this is a lesson that I found hard. It took me a long time to learn, and I'll get to that in a second. I've recently just done my master's in applied sports psychology. And within that master's, I studied Tannenbaum Smith's leadership continuum, which basically it breaks down leadership on a continuum from autocratic to democratic and then to laissez-faire and everywhere in between. Within that, I identify leader characteristics within that continuum, also from autocratic, from the left, directiveness to collaboration and empowering, and then the effects that they have on their athletes. So the effects, those leader characteristics, obviously a directive coach would have a submissive or reactive player, whereas a collaborative coach would have a cooperative player, and an empowering coach would have an independent player and someone who's responsible and autonomous. And within that study, I also broke down what it is to be an effective coach based off the identifications by sports psychologists, and basically what sports psychologists identified as a coaching process, a successful coaching process, is self-awareness, people orientation, clarity of purpose. But the adaptability one was the most important one for me, and which is probably most relevant to this presentation. Coaches are adaptable to their athletes, they're adaptable to the situation, and they have a balanced approach to leadership. So they don't just have an autocratic, democratic, or laissez-faire style. Successful coaches generally visit which style is necessary for the moment and the player that they're coaching. All right, something that I can probably safely say that neither one of the athletes on your screen had a balanced approach to their leadership at a very effective level in their coaching careers. A little bit about me, just to paint a little bit of a story here, a little bit of a backlog, is that I started coaching Waterford Wildcats 16 years ago. Absolute honour to coach that club, and basically my first 8 years of coaching were spent, I suppose, learning and developing. Like any coach starting off, I suppose I thought I knew it all. A very democratic coach. I wanted to try and build my players up, but I got to a point after a number of years where I realized that the results of my democratic process were not assisting my players in being successful at the highest levels. They were successful, they were getting better, they were progressing, but they weren't. We didn't have a competitive culture, the competitive culture that I'm speaking about today. After those years of coaching, I kind of reflected and I said, well, maybe I need to be more autocratic. So I suppose the latter stage of my coaching career at Wildcats, I was a more autocratic coach, trying to force that climate of that competitive culture, trying to force players to be competitive, almost embodying the Roy Keane role as a coach, or the Diego Maradonas or the Michael Jordans. And what I found there is I was equally as unsuccessful, but I didn't like the person I was after becoming. And I guarantee you the players didn't like who I was either. So that lesson, I kind of got to a point where I suppose I learned my first big lesson in coaching, and that's reflected on screen now. Socrates, true knowledge is knowing that you know nothing at all. I think my first lecturer, Richie Bulger, probably who pointed that out to me, and I think it's one of the most true statements we can make as coaches. Understanding that we are always learning, we're always developing, understanding that there is no roof on knowledge and where to find knowledge to get better. That's probably one of the most important, one of the most important things a coach can have on their journey to creating these environments. So that led me to a Jerry Fitzpatrick. Started my degree in sports coaching, finished with a master's in sports psychology, and everywhere in between. Jerry was, I suppose, anyone that is involved in the basketball community knows Jerry is one of probably the most successful coaches definitely the most successful coach in Waterford, and kind of he built up Wildcats, and he was a national coach and very successful over his career. And he's currently involved in hurling and football and soccer, but he's a very, very successful coach and taught me a lot about the game. Also introduced me to a man, Mr. Pat Burke. So while Jerry was the fountain of knowledge when it came to educated practice, Pat was the fountain of knowledge when it came to applied practice. And I suppose my meeting Pat in 2015, it allowed me to, I suppose, have a really good education in what a competitive culture looks like, how different countries, different organizations embody a competitive culture, and how they create that internally and move towards success. And I took, I suppose, that education that I still am kind of undergoing, which led to, I suppose, some of the things that I'm going to talk about here today. And as Paul alluded to at the start of this presentation, probably one of the proudest moments of my life, and a lot of proud moments in between with some of the young girls and young guys that I've coached and some of the people I've worked with and learned from. All right, so moving on, that's all behind me. Moving on to the actual presentation and talking about how we create a competitive culture. All right, so how do we as coaches create a competitive culture is going to be a main topic of this presentation. How we foster competitiveness in each of our athletes, how we create competition within each of our teams, how we evaluate performances successfully, how the importance of practice on competitiveness and competitiveness of our athletes. And then finally, at what age does winning become important? All right, to start with that question that's highlighted in yellow, Bally and Hamilton, obviously the long-term athlete development model that has been adapted and doctored and utilized by so many successful national government bodies, and I suppose a couple and a few on the left there, the Irish IRFU and the Canadian Sport would be just two to mention. So that basically what Bally and Hamilton identified was that all athletes go through phases of development, from active start to fundamentals, learning to train, training to train, training to compete, and only when they get to a level of competent competing, then they are ready to try and learn how to win. Now, there's a lot of arguments for and against. There is obviously, like any good theory, you can break it down a million different ways. But basically, what they said is that you have to be competent before you can compete, and you have to be able to compete before you can actually go and win. In my view, they're talking about outcome goals. They're not talking about performance goals, and they're not talking about process goals. And I'll get to that later on, but that is the primary research behind long-term athlete development. So to understand the individual and how we can foster competitiveness in each individual, John Wooden said it best for me: success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you made the effort to become the best of which you are capable. Now, the best of which you are capable for me is internal competitiveness. Finding a way to foster internal competitiveness is the primary method behind creating a culture of competitiveness, and making sure that people are moving in a direction towards the best of which they are capable. And I suppose the first question I would ask each coach, and I ask myself on a regular basis, is how do we evaluate our athletes? How do we evaluate them technically and tactically? If I can think back to a time where I was learning as a coach and not, I suppose, have the processes that I have now, a lot of my evaluations of athletes would have been self-evaluations, my own personal opinions about a subjective view of what an athlete was good or bad at. And those athletes needed to listen to my own subjective view of what they needed to improve to be the best that they could be. Some do, some don't. Some hang on every word you say. Others don't think you have a lot of good things to say. It's the nature of what we're doing. So for me, in order to be really successful at harnessing that competitive culture in each athlete, we need to have methods of evaluating them technically. And it can be as simple as you want, and it can be as unorthodox as you like. Everybody's own, their evaluation methods can be different. But for me, I simplify it. And when you can look at a graph like this, as said, with a guard forward on the left, a point guard in the middle, and a post player at the right, you can sit down with any young athlete and you can talk to them about their technical ability and their effectiveness and performance. And you can tell them how you would evaluate them, or get them to self-evaluate and reflect on their own performances. You can harness that competitive nature internally based on an actual evaluation system rather than a subjective view of what I think you should be doing to be better. I think it's one of the most important facets of coaching performance. And I think it needs to happen in all pillars of coaching performance. So if we break down the tactical components, You sit down with an athlete and you talk to them about how they handle zone pressure, how they handle man pressure. You know, what are they like in transition offense? What are they like in 3v3? If you sit down and you give your subjective view, but you back it up with an actual thought out process and a visual process that they can see and go, all right, so in this situation, if I look at the bottom left hand guard forward in a tactical opponent, somebody, that person would sit and go, okay, I'm poor in a clutch performance. Coach, how do I improve in a clutch performance? Now we've created that connection between our athletes of questioning and actually asking questions to help me progress and move forward, rather than just giving them our subjective view of what they need to improve on. As I said before, this is very important in all levels of sports performance. So how are we evaluating them physically? You know, do we understand the concept of physically, or can we partner with somebody that can help us evaluate our players physically? Can we give our players direction into how to develop their physical capabilities and make sure that they're a well-rounded athlete by the time they're ready to compete? You know, how do we develop them mentally? All right, so mental training in sports is somewhat, I suppose, it's on the fringes a little bit, and it's not really identified as much. But how do we evaluate our players' leadership? How do we evaluate our players' knowledge of emotional intelligence or emotional regulation? How do we evaluate that, and then how do we deliver that to athletes to light that fire of internal competition within? If we can light that fire of internal competition within each of our athletes, we're already probably 70% away to a competitive, naturally competitive environment, because everybody that shows up will show up wanting to be successful. All right, so a little quote here: if you're trying to achieve, there will be roadblocks. I've had them, everybody has had them. But obstacles don't have to stop you. If you run into a wall, don't turn around and give up. Figure out a way to climb it, figure out a way to go through it, or work around it. And that, as us as coaches, we have to be there for when athletes want to find those ways around it. Here's a little example of how this process helps a kid.
Good.
Okay. So in this video, the guy came into this young man came into us and wanted to shoot the ball in Florida. On the right-hand side was his first video we took on week 1. On the left-hand side is his second video we took on week 12. This process was basically, we took a video of the athlete, sat down with the athlete, and we asked him, what does he see? When the athlete, I suppose his last, we see his last shot here. When the athlete saw his shot, he was absolutely blown away by the things that he thought he was doing that he wasn't doing. He asked us questions like, do my feet really look like that? Do I really bring the ball down that low? Do I really cock my hand out to the right when I shoot it? We didn't even have to coach, and a coach doesn't even have to coach a player. If we can have an effective evaluation tool, they'll see it for themselves a lot of the time. And as you can see on the left, I'll play it again. At the end of that 12 weeks, I suppose there was coaching, but there wasn't a whole lot of coaching. We've just, I suppose, you've ignited that competitive fire in the athlete to want to get better at certain things that they didn't know that they're not doing, but now they do. I think if we can have an evaluation tool, that's the first process. This works at all ages. So this is a 32-year-old former pro basketball player, and he was the same. We showed him that video on the right, and same thing. Do I really drop the ball down? Do I really bring it to the left-hand side of my body? Do I jump that far to my left when I shoot? And all these things are just an exploring conversation with an evaluation. Now that player has to, what that player wants to achieve and has that internal fire to progress and get better. So how do we evaluate? All right, so the evaluation methods from a coach, the subjective evaluation by coaches, the subjective evaluation and self-reflection by athletes, and then there's obviously factual measures, testing performance tools we can use. For me, when I look at leadership and I look at testing, at different ages of Bally and Hamilton's long-term athlete development model, athletes need different things. And I think it's very important for us as coaches to create a competitive environment that we understand how we have to adapt based on what the athletes need. So somebody will just say, a kid at 8, 9, 10, 11, or a team of kids, when they come into a program they want to be led, they need autocratic leadership. They need us to set the boundaries. They need us to set the parameters. They need us to say, all right, dribble the ball from this cone to this cone. I've never dribbled the ball before. All right, crossover. This is how you do a crossover. They need us to take the lead in order for them to feel successful in what they're doing. Evaluations at this point are subjective by the coach because the athlete doesn't really know what they're doing. They don't really have that, but they need that structure to progress. So we have to be adaptable to that. In contrast, when they get into their, I suppose, teenage years and they get towards the training to compete side of the long-term athlete development model, they now have an understanding of the game. So as an athlete, if we continue with an autocratic process, now all of a sudden we're being autocratic with players that actually want to try and formulate their own ideas. They have a need for exploration. They have a need to develop their own thinking. They don't have a need for us to keep telling them what we feel they should be doing. So we have to adapt. We have to be more democratic. And then we have to, I suppose, in that situation, the evaluations can be subjective. They're more to the athlete. The athlete evaluates themselves, and then we can help them identify strategies of progression. And finally, and kind of a really interesting one for me, and this kind of came from my exploration conversations with Pat. Pat had identified to me that at the highest level, Jerry was one of the better coaches he'd ever worked with. And he said the reason why he was one of the better coaches was because he had a balanced approach to leadership, in that when athletes came to him first, he had that democratic approach to identify what they wanted to achieve. And then once they had let him know what he wanted to achieve, then he became autocratic. You've told me what you want to achieve. Now I'm going to help you make it happen. And you're not probably going to like how I do that. But I suppose, a training to win at that side of things, there needs to be strong dictatorial leadership in order to get multiple people moving in the same direction based on what their desires and what their wants are. All right, so I found it very interesting as a coach that we have to have that balance of leadership, and we have to be able to create the environment that's conducive with the athlete rather than what we want ourselves. Well, that brings me to a team environment. So Tuckman in 1965 identified stages of group formation. Plenty of people on this thread probably has seen this. So the stages of group formation, when the team comes together first, they get in a forming stage, and almost immediately, maybe after a couple of sessions, they go through the process of storming. And storming is when they start to have internal conflicts based on what their own ideas are of the game of basketball, what they want to achieve, and where they want to move with it. And after they figure out the storming processes, after they figure out the power struggles within it, then they move into a norming phase, and finally, after coming through norming phase, they're in a performance setting. So the performance setting is ultimately what every coach is trying to get to. So to move on and to look at it from this point of view, if you look at the athlete behaviors in each one of these settings, in forming the behaviors, the members have varying degrees of commitment. You know, they have the communication is low. You know, they're dependent on a kind of a directive leadership and for the coach to set the parameters. In the storming phase, there's a lot of internal conflict, there's struggles, players kind of trying to assess where they fall on the ladder and what they're going to be doing moving forward. Once they move into the norming phase, this is where a coach takes most of the, the coaching. Once we're moving in the right direction, the same direction, is now a coach's job to try and foster that development, to try and help them develop an identity. Are we going to be a fast break team? Are we going to be a passing team? Are we going to be a half-court team? Are we going to set up in a zone? Are we going to play a man defense, a solid man defense? How are we going to play in the half-court? The different things start to come together, and this is where a coach needs to probably do the majority of their coaching and teaching. And once they come through that, they move into the performance stage. And in the performance stage, things have become habitual. And when things have become habitual, these athletes now are in a constant state of flow when they play. They just read and react how each other play, how they play within their systems, and now the flow becomes progressive, and it starts to build and get better and better and better. Coaches, for me, in my interpretation of creating a coaching culture, coaches need to establish competitive practice within the norming phase of group formation. They need to be facilitative in the storming phase. They need to have conflict resolution strategy in the forming stage. They need to develop a plan to help players progress. But when we come norming and performing, especially norming, that's when a coach starts to identify a competitive culture and making it so that everything has a purpose. So how do we evaluate our teams? So I suppose there's outcomes goals, there's performance goals, and there's process goals. Outcome goals is basically winning and losing, or outperforming another competitor. And if we evaluate our teams specifically based on outcome goals, then we're either going to win or lose. If we are the best team in the league, we're going to have a fantastic season. If we're anybody else, we're going to have a horrible season. If we're I suppose middle of the road, 50% of the season is going to be a bad season. 50% of it is going to be somewhat a successful season. It's too narrow a focus in order for us to foster that competitive environment. So in order to create a competitive environment, we must set up performance goals and process goals. Performance goals are improving personal performance. Process goals improving individual abilities of forming techniques. Each team needs to understand what are our goals as a team for this specific game. As a coach, what are our specific goals for the forming, for the storming, for the norming, and for the performing phases of our group formation? What are the goals I need to set out for my team for this next 3 weeks, because we're in a forming stage? What are the next after that? How do I set myself up for success in the future or at the end of the season? And then on is individually specific. I mean, our athletes need to understand what they need to do to be successful and how they need to implement their own personal strategies and what their actual statistics are, or it may be non-numbers, it may be effort levels. What do they need to do to be successful within their own processes? If you break down goals into performance and process goals, you allow for a lot more success and failures and developing that competitive element rather than just basing it on the outcome. Once we've established our performance goals, we need to have a system of evaluating our performances. So Wiener's model of attribution is we understand if when we have a performance, did we win or did we lose? You always have to evaluate that because that is important. It just can't be the only focus. It has to be a part of the focus. If we won, if we lost, were the factors stable or unstable? So stable being, did we win because our ability was better than the other teams? Did we win because, the task difficulty was below us or above us? Unstable. Did we win because the other team didn't really put in an effort, or did we not put in an effort, or we put in a maximum effort, or lose, flip that, vice versa? The locus of causality. Did we lose because of internal factors or external factors? How do we rate our performance goals and how do we evaluate it? I suppose it breaks down to 4 questions. Did we win or did we lose is always the first one. And then did we play well or did we play poorly? So that's, if you can add those up in those questions, and you can every game you're evaluating that, you'll be on a process of creating a competitive environment. I bring back up this slide that I had the first with Michael Jordan. I play to win, whether during practice or a real game. I will not let anything get in my way, and my competitive enthusiasm to win. So the reason why I bring that up is we practice how we play. And I think as coaches, we always have to understand that we practice how we play, and what we simulate in a practice environment is what we inevitably get in a performance environment from our athletes. So to create a competitive environment, I really liked how Erin spoke last night. She spoke about running pick and rolls in a 5-man set, so because there's always variables rather than just the pick and roll that's happening. And to put that into this model, our focus can either be narrow or broad. So the continuum from right or from left to right, we either have a broad focus or a narrow focus. All right, so we either see things in a holistic level on a bigger scale, or we see things in a very narrow scale. So a narrow scale will be dribbling the ball from cone A to cone B, whereas a broader scale will be dribbling the ball from one basket to the other with 5 defenders and four teammates. So we have that. And we also have an ability to attribute internally and externally. So did I fail because of my own control, or did I fail because of something that was external to me? My effort is internal. Did I work hard at something, or did or was there external factors? Was it like luck, or was I ready to play? I think in practices, we have to make sure that if we teach athletes how to perform with narrow attention and focus, that we build their attention and focus to a broad attention and focus for the purpose of performance. If we run pick and roll drills every day, and we run a pick and roll, a pick and pop, a pick and fade, and whatever way we run our pick and rolls, but we only do it in a 2v2 capacity, and then we go into our performances and we're running a pick and roll in a 5v5 capacity, all of a sudden there's an awful lot more variables, a broader attention and focus that distracts our players from actually being successful. That really hurts a competitive environment. Building a competitive environment for me is to teach them close skills in a narrow attention and focus, and then progressively develop them to a broad and game-like state. And if we can progressively build them to a broad and game-like state, and by the end of that, they're ready for performance. And we can take this on any part of the game, technically or tactically, and we can implement it in our strategies. To make sure that we're harnessing a competitive mindset, every drill should be done for time, score, or distance. And this is one of the first things Jerry Fitzpatrick taught me, and it was probably one of the things that lasted the longest. Winning is a mentality. Winning is a mentality that's fostered and it's harnessed. And as a coach, if we do drills and we do competitive drills, but we don't have a time, score, or distance, then what starts to happen is we have our players start to have activity without accomplishment. And activity without accomplishment is basically another way of saying doing something for the sake of doing it, or doing something just because. And then when we get into a situation where we have that attention and focus of having to win or having to put more points on the board, or the clock is running down, or a distance sprint for something, we have not trained our athletes to respond to that competitive challenge. The only way for me, and my belief, and the only way is that we have a time, score, or distance in every single drill that we do. We put those time score, and it doesn't even have to be a massive time score difference. It doesn't, but it just has to be there. It has to be a mental stimulus for our athletes. So finally, and I suppose to recap on it, I started this by talking about competitive players versus competitive coaches. And I think a lot of us as coaches, we move from a competitive playing environment into a competitive coaching environment, and we transfer our skills, kind of transfer over very well, but sometimes our mentality or our coaching process doesn't transfer over as well. And I suppose hopefully this is maybe a catalyst for everybody to understand, or for us to start a conversation about how we should be thinking as coaches rather than how we thought as players, especially young coaches just coming into the game right now. We talked about focus. So we talked about the difference between a competitive coach or a player wanting to be perfect, whereas a coach is always trying to be progressive. So that's probably one of the big reasons why great players sometimes fail to make that jump to great coaching, is because they don't understand that it's not about perfection, it's about progression. As a player, it's about perfection, it's about pursuit of perfection. But as a coach, it's always about the pursuit of progression. If you're progressing your players, you're providing a great platform for them to be successful. We talked about evaluating our players, and we talked about internal focus being, our internal competitiveness being the platform for creating a competitive environment. And that starts with evaluation, teaching players how to compete with themselves, teaching them how to identify competition with themselves, and then teaching them how to progress to their next level of their best self. We talked about evaluating the team. We talked about the stages of group formation in Tupman, and we talked about helping that team embrace a competitive performance climate. So, and the different, what our job is in the different phases of that, and when is the appropriate time to develop a competitive performance environment within our teams. And finally, we talked about winning being a habit. So we talked about practices. We talked about how to make sure we structure our practices, preparing our players for games. We talked about how we make winning, our success and failure, the backbone of our coaching philosophies, because every opportunity to win is a moment to kind of, I suppose, celebrate. But every loss is a moment to learn. But we're learning for the reason of wanting to win, not learning just for the sake of learning. All right. So there's a few of my references, and then I'm open to any questions now, unless Paul would like to move on.
Yeah, we've got some. Yeah, I'm getting messages on the side and in a non-text message. So what I'm going to do is I've got about 4 or 5 here. That I have a few of my own, but I think these ones might override it a little bit. So what I'll do is I will start with. I'm going to leave Puff Summers 2 to last. First of all, somebody's after asking, can they get the slides off you? Is there a possibility of sharing that presentation?
100%.
Maybe we could talk about that at the end. Question here came in: how do you manage a player who is your most competitive player, but at the same time has the attitude issues if things aren't going his way? His competitiveness can come across negatively if things don't go his way.
Okay, so from my experience in that, if things aren't going a player's way and they have an attitude, it's not because they're a bad person, it's because they're frustrated. And it's my job as a coach to help them work through that frustration. Many helping players work through frustration. It really depends on, I suppose, that through my master's in sports psychology, Jerry every single day would say that every question depends. And what it really would depend on what the frustration is at. If the frustration is at himself, it's my job to maybe find a way to help him get past them frustrations. But if the frustration is at his teammates, it's my job then to, I suppose, create a strategy of conflict resolution between teammates. And that may be that may be straight away, or that may have to wait. In the moment, I have to adapt and I suppose try and find the best course of success for a player moving forward, and that may be extracting the player from the team, sitting down, or that may be playing the player and everybody understanding that success and winning is very important to a team. So I'm not going to sit a player that's going to help us win. I'm going to try and do the best I can to win right now, and I'm going to address the conflict later, and that may be sitting down with him or sitting down with a group and having a conflict resolution strategy.
Excellent. Question might be related to something earlier. What tools can be used or are available to evaluate athletes across the 4 categories mentioned?
I personally don't know of any external. I know specific individual tools. I know that strength and conditioning have their own methods of evaluation. I know as a coach, technical and tactical coaching, there's a million different platforms out there, but they're all quite subjective at times and based on what personal opinion of coaching is. I personally think it's the best to get on Excel, learn how to use Excel, and create your own. I think everybody's coaching philosophy is unique, and I think if you have to follow somebody else's tutelage on how you develop your own strategies, then inevitably you're going to be kind of almost trying to figure out how it's helping you rather than developing something you know is going to help you.
Excellent. Okay. Do you think competitiveness is a fundamental skill, not winning, but for an individual to be competitive? Can that be taught early on without making younger ages all about winning?
I think it can be taught at any age. I think we can do equally as good a job at coaching competitiveness as we do at coaching the competitiveness out of kids. I suppose for me, I had massive conversations in the past. I believe, and I think there's a lot of coaches out there might agree or disagree with this, but I believe that every kid is born special. And little by little, we as coaches and we as adults, we start to take things away from them, not give things to them. And the kid that gets to the top of the mountain is the one that's had the least amount of stuff taken away from them. That's my process on coaching. So first and foremost, as any coach, my first job is to do no harm. Make sure do no harm. And if I do no harm, then adding anything to a kid is always going to be. I believe, like, to create competitiveness in a kid, we don't ask the kid to be competitive. If I'm competitive and the kid sees I'm competitive and the kid is playing for me, then he's probably going to follow she is going to follow my leadership, because we generally mirror what we see in people that we admire rather than listen to what they have to say. So as a coach, if I embody wanting to win, a lot of the time the team follows that suit. And that, for me, you can learn to be competitive at any age, but you have to have that time, score, or distance in your drills. If you're running drills for no reason, what am I being competitive for?
Excellent. Second last question, because one just came in there after I had the 4 of them done. So, have you coached guys, girls that seem to coast in practice? And this is a great question. Great question. Have you coached guys, girls that seem to coast in practice, but really turn it on in games or competitive drill scrimmages, maybe? If so, how did you handle that? I think we've all seen that. I suppose in the national team, we kind of gamers, great practice players, and then there's very few that can do both. So I guess that's where that question is coming from.
The easy, quick answer is accept. And I suppose a lot of people out there kind of going, you're talking crap right now. But for me, I try to get, like, so you said to me once, Paul, and you're 100% correct with this. Kids don't know how much, kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And as an athlete, as a coach, the first thing I need to do is get to know my athlete. If my athlete, and I'm trying to evaluate, and I'm sitting and discussing my athlete about playing basketball, and their idea and their identity is, I'm not a basketball player. I play basketball because my friends play basketball. I know I'm really good at basketball, but I really don't care about basketball. Who am I as a person to try and, I suppose, make a decision to push that player down a process of putting in all this extra effort that she doesn't really want to put in? What I will do is I will harness that talent for the good of the team. And there's a good example for me with Mantis, our current basketball player in Portlaoise Panthers. He's probably one of the best players I've ever coached. Now, Mantis he works really hard and he works night job, and he finds it hard to get to practice. So he can never practice with us, but he practices by himself during the day. But when he comes into our team, he makes every single player in our team better. Now, I'm effectively using Mantis as one of the best players I've ever coached to make everybody else better. And I think everybody else understands he's there to make them better and to help them succeed. And I think once everybody understands that, they accept that. Now, there may come a time where Mantis wants to commit more and he might give us more, or there may be a time where he says, look, I can't commit anymore, and he's gone. But while he's here, I'm going to harness what he can give us for the best benefit of everybody in the team.
Excellent, excellent. And I like the phrase harnessing. I think that's a great phrase, harnessing. Last question. How do you manage a talented player who you want to progress further, but when he goes home, he has a parent who tells him he is already brilliant and contradicts the coach?
Cut out there, Paul.
What's that?
You cut out. I didn't hear any of that. I just saw you smile.
Sorry, yeah, it's, I think it resonates quite well. How do you manage a talented player who you want to progress further, but when he goes home, he or she has a parent who tells him or her he is already brilliant and contradicts the coach?
I think the beauty of sports is that everybody has an opinion. And I think as a coach, when I learned to embrace that everybody's going to have an effect on an athlete is when I most started enjoying coaching. Because there's a little dance there of me trying to do everything I can to help that player get to the next level. But inevitably, the parent wants what's best for the athlete. The only difference is that we have different processes. My process is to evaluate and find a way for you to get to your next level. Your process is to tell him he or she is God's gift to mankind and that you're going to like. But inevitably, we're on the same team. But I think we don't want conflict so that we seem like we're on different teams, because the conflict reverberates back on the athlete. We just have to have an agreement that we're on the same team. We just have different processes. And you continue with your process, I continue with my process, but inevitably what I want to see is that kid getting to the next level. And if I feel like our difference in process is having an effect on that kid, I am going to evaluate, I am going to tell him, and I am going to say to you, I feel like it's having an impact. I have no power to change what you're going to do with your kid. I only have the power to try and have a conversation, make it better.
Yeah, I think I like to use the phrase, everybody knows what a good lasagna tastes like, but it's different in how you make it. So,
Fact.
Yeah, so
barbecue based.
Absolutely fantastic. And getting some really great text messages in there. Everybody's saying it's going to really take a while for them to implement that. And I suppose on that question, if you were to start this whole cultural process, where would you advise people to start?
It started for me with that Socrates quote, true knowledge is knowing that you know nothing. I think, obviously, my years in Wildcats, I was probably loved every minute of it. But I thought I knew it all then. And when I thought I knew it all, I really didn't. I really didn't have. I thought I had the best interest in my athletes, but I didn't, because I had the best interest in myself. I want to make you successful, because if you're successful, I look like a great coach, because I know I'm a great coach. And when I realized that I had a lot to learn as a coach, that's when I started to stop looking at me going, how can I be a great coach? And I started talking about, how can I make you a great player? And I think if we embody that philosophy of it's not about the coach, it's about how we can make our players the best they can possibly be. Starts with knowing that I have to get better if I'm going to make them better to get to the next level.
Great stuff. Great stuff. So, Niall, thanks very much. Hang on the line in case there's any questions at the end, and we have a bit of time for it. So I'm just going to take a quick break. I'm going to become the presenter myself, just show a quick video while Hannah gets herself set up, and I'll share my screen and work on this.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. All right, guys. So I'm led to believe you didn't hear the sound that, but that was thanks to Huddle. So just to answer a question from earlier about sharing slides, what we will be doing this evening is releasing yesterday's presentation on Huddle with a password, and we'll be releasing that out. And also in that we'll store the slides. So everything that has happened yesterday, Kieran slides, Aaron slides, the video from yesterday that we did behind closed doors, and hopefully the slides from our two presenters this evening will all be there for you guys to be able to host that, or to see it. So all the resources we put in there, including some video that wasn't there for Aaron's presentation. So all our resources are going to store on one site. And thanks again to Huddle, well actually Avenir Sports who provided Huddle for us to host or to store all our resources. So thanks a million for that. So I'm going to pass over to Hannah, and she can take over from there. So, Hannah, you good to go?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I can see your screen.
Okay, great, perfect. From current slide. Okay, can you see that?
Yep, I sure can.
Okay, perfect. So, hi everybody. That's going to be hard to follow that presentation. It was really informative, but I'm going to chat to you guys tonight about a bit about nutrition and kind of what the coaches should know, and what you guys should know and try to maybe learn a little bit about. Unfortunately, Basketball Ireland, we don't have loads of money to have a nutritionist for every team. And I think in the last couple of years, there has been a better emphasis, so to speak, on nutrition for players. And I think that's great. And it's definitely growing in this country and in the sport. But if us as coaches, if we could kind of educate ourselves a little bit more, it would really, really benefit the players. So that's what I'm going to try to do tonight. I don't expect you all to be nutritionists afterwards, but hopefully I'll give you a couple of tips and maybe some pointers that you'll take away and go with your teams whenever we can go back training. Okay, so the goals for tonight, we're going to go over macronutrients and what ones are needed to fuel an athlete, the signs of dehydration, malnutrition, and REDs, how to prep for training and away tournaments, and how to start a positive conversation about good nutrition within the team. Okay, so a complete athlete checklist looks like you have their training sorted, you have their recovery sorted, their mental prep is good, the strength conditioning is down, their skills are up. But I think what I said previous, what's been lacking in the last couple of years is nutrition. And it is vitally important to encompass a whole athlete. So you could have a player that is really, really performing very, very well on the court at maybe the start of the season, and their nutrition is terrible. They don't eat well at all. Maybe they don't eat a lot. They're not fueling themselves. So if you take that away from the complete checklist of an athlete, they're not going to perform for the whole season. Okay, so longevity and nutrition is really, really important for a longevity. Basketball season is quite long. So it's really, really vital. And I hope everybody appreciates my little image here, because she took me about 10 minutes to create earlier on. So food to fuel, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are a basketball player's best friend, okay? They are our #1 fuel for training and for games. Because of the high demands of basketball, your athlete needs to be fueled for the game and for the intensity that the game demands on them. Okay, we get glucose from carbohydrates, which is what we use for energy. So where do we find these carbohydrates? And they're found in fruits and vegetables, pastas, rice, whole grains, granola bars, potatoes. You might see some players eating jellies right before a game. They're trying to get their glucose in. Maybe during a game, they're drinking a Lucozade. They're topping up their glucose levels, okay? Basically, if you took one thing from this presentation, carbohydrates are a basketball player's best friend. Now, next up, we have protein. So after carbohydrates, I vote protein as next to important, because it is essential for recovery for a player. So say, for example, you're coaching a team and you have maybe a training weekend. So you're training Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday, or you're away at Europeans and you have game upon game upon game. Protein is what recovers your body to enable the player to keep going, okay? So ideally, a basketball player or an athlete would take in 20 grams of protein every 3 to 4 hours, okay? As human beings, we actually can't store more, like we can't take in more than 20 grams of protein in one sitting. So I'm not going to say how much they should be having because it's all personalized, but every 3 to 4 hours, an athlete should be ingesting protein, okay, in an ideal world. Now, it's also quite important that after a game or after training, an athlete is ingesting protein, because that hour after training has finished is vital for recovery. So say, for example, you're training all day Saturday and you have a full day on Sunday as well, okay? That hour on Saturday night after protein is when the athlete should be taking in protein to recover those muscles that have been broken down all day. So where you would find protein would be in your meats, your fish, your yogurts, cheese, milk, eggs, protein bars. You might find some of the kids eating, but they're really, really good sources of protein. Next we have is fat. So fat will fuel us for long intensities, okay? So say, for example, your carbohydrate source, which is your #1 source of energy, is depleted in a game. We don't want the body to go to protein. We want it to go to fat because we want to keep our protein for recovery afterwards. So good sources of fat would be oils, nuts, seeds, fish, cheeses, avocados, the millennial food at the minute. But again, fat, also one thing to note, fat actually takes the most to digest. So we're going to talk about pre-game and pre-training meals later on. But just to note that fat takes a lot of energy from your body to digest. So if you're eating a meal before a game, you don't want it to contain a lot of fat, because you don't want the body to use energy to break that down. Okay, so that's one thing just to note. So dehydration, it's vitally important that a player does not become dehydrated. I'm sure at one stage as a coach, you've seen players that haven't drank enough water, okay? The signs for dehydration would be they become dizzy or tired, okay? But also there's a lack of performance, there's a lack of concentration, a lack of coordination, like you can't chat to them maybe as well as you used to be, and they aren't improving, and maybe they're prone to cramping a lot more, okay? So it's all, we know when maybe somebody hasn't drank water for the whole day, they have a headache coming into training, they may not perform well. But dehydration can happen also over multiple of training sessions. So it's really, really important, if you see it, if you notice something, say it to your player and go, look, like, have you drank something today? Have you drank enough today, excuse me? And if player says no, like, just chat to them about it. So one of the ways that is the easiest, it's the easiest way to educate players on dehydration. You don't have to be a nutritionist to do this. You can just explain to your players what you're doing. You're going to weigh them before and you're going to weigh them after training, okay? And make sure you say to them, especially girls who might be conscious about weight, it isn't about your weight, it's actually about water loss, okay? So as you can see on the screen there, the amount of fluid loss, so basically the difference of the weight, multiplied by 1.5, and that's the amount of water that they need to drink over the next 4 hours, okay? They need to replenish what they've lost. All they've lost is water and salt, okay? So they need to put that back in. It's really, really important, again, if you're training for a couple of days at a time, like Irish training or something, you don't want to be dehydrated Saturday night and then throughout the night you're not drinking anything and Sunday you can't perform, okay? If there's a training, which I think nearly every training is over 60 minutes, we need to top up our glycogen stores. So we need to top up our carbohydrate stores. The easiest way to do that is through an energy drink, okay? And at the minute, Lucozade is probably the best. Not necessarily needed to drink the whole bottle. Even if players don't like it, they can dilute it by half and half with water and half Lucozade. Just a couple of sips to give them that energy to keep going, okay? And if you are away at training sessions or you notice that player is dehydrated, it's Very, very handy to have these in your bag. I'm going to go over later on what a coach's bag should look like with regards to nutrition. These are exceptional. Again, you don't have to be a nutritionist to say to your players, does anybody need to take Diorolite? If you feel dehydrated, pop one of them in. It does wonders, okay? And it has been shown that a 2% dehydration of a player could impair performance of field goal shooting, on-court sprinting, and defense. So basically, the study showed that it incorporates the whole basketball athlete on a court, okay? So dehydration really isn't your friend as a coach. It's also very important that when you're having long training sessions, you give adequate water breaks to players. I know some coaches may not, you just may have to get through a lot of stuff, but it is vitally important just to keep the dehydration at bay, okay? So regular water intakes would be great. Now, malnutrition. So the signs of malnutrition, as you can see on the screen, are lack of strength, lack of performance, poor growth. Your player may not be able to maintain weight. They have particular growing problems, and also they might get injured more often. This is quite hard as a coach to recognize, and I understand I'm kind of maybe throwing a lot at some coaches who may not even heard of this before, but it is good to have this in the back of your brain that you're aware, okay? Because maybe an Irish coach, you're not seeing your players all the time. You don't really know what's going on at home. They may not be fueling correctly, and it could be for a number of different reasons, but it is very important that you keep an eye on these, okay? And don't be afraid to ask them, like, oh, have you got a packed lunch, or what's going on? Like, not what's going on, but can I see your lunch, or are you eating okay? Do you need food or anything? But if you think that there is a problem, definitely ask the parent, okay? Because if you don't, it might lead into REDS. So REDS is a relative energy deficiency syndrome. And if you see the markers, do something before it's too late. And basically REDS is kind of what will happen if a player gets really, really bad. It could happen, it happens a lot in weight sports, okay, that body composition might be a huge factor. But I have seen it happen in basketball, and especially these days with social media being a positive and a negative impact on a player, okay, and making people feel like they need to look a certain way. It's really important that we don't let it get to this stage, because if REDS happens, it could have an effect on the player and they can't reverse it. So it could affect their bone health, their menstrual function in females, their central nervous system, the renal system, cardiovascular problems, gastrointestinal problems, just a lot of stuff that would be quite hard to reverse in an athlete, and especially in underage. We don't want this happening, okay? So if you see something out of the ordinary, if you're noticing a certain trend, definitely say something, do something about it before it's too late, okay? And especially be aware that if you're training more, and especially with Irish teams or even during the season, like, their players should be eating more to fuel themselves, okay? Now we're going to go over the pre-game meal. Now, again, I understand you're not, as coaches, going to be there feeding the players. Well, again, you might be when you're away with them, but it is good just to know relatively what they should be having before a game. So your last pre-game meal for a game or for a big training session should be about 2 to 3 hours beforehand, so it has enough time to digest, and then they might have a small snack right before, okay? So you want to choose a carbohydrate source and then a low-fat protein source, okay? I realize they all just popped up on the screen very fast, but something along the lines of, you could have porridge, Greek yogurt, pasta and mince, low-fat, a lean mince maybe. You could have rice and chicken. You can have whole grain toast and eggs. Again, nutrition is very dependent with the player and the person, but these are some good sources, and good sources that you guys could know. And again, we're going to talk about it later on, about traveling and going to hotels and talking to management in the hotels about food. These are really, really good stuff to have as options when traveling, or maybe even if you're away at camps with Irish teams, to have these there before them, okay? Now, one of the things I'm going to say here is I haven't mentioned fat, and I did mention that a couple of slides previous. We want to keep our protein sources low in fat, because again, we don't want it to take up the energy to digest, okay? We want to keep that energy for the game. And yep, so we have nutrition after training. So why is nutrition after training important? I've talked about the recovery portion and how protein within that hour is important, but we want to refuel the muscle glycogen stores So that's our carbohydrate stores, okay? So after training, if we have training the next day, we need to refuel the glycogen that we've used. We've already talked about repair muscles, so our protein stores. We want to rehydrate, which we've spoken about. And inadequate nutrition recovery can result in increased fatigue during the games, reduced performance at the next training, and increased muscle soreness before the next game, okay? Now, these are little things that may happen to a player and they may not even realize, okay? But again, if we chose the better option for our players as coaches, we would just this wouldn't happen, okay? Pizza, and I've had a few discussions with coaches about pizza, okay? Pizza is great, it's kind of like a celebratory thing. And I understand as well with Basketball Ireland, maybe the budget's not there to have obviously like a 5-course meal afterwards with beautiful food, and pizza could be an easy option. It's not the best option to refuel athletes if they have training tomorrow, if they have a game tomorrow, okay? You can maybe have it like at the end of a camp and celebrate with a couple of slices of pizza, okay? But if you want your athletes to perform the way that they performed today, the next day, it's very, very hard to do that if you're going to give them pizza. If pizza is the only option, make sure that that protein recovery window was fulfilled, okay? And that might mean telling the parents what they need to give to their child. So their parents or whoever minds for them usually gives their lunch for the day that's in it. Well, maybe they need to pack something extra, okay? If you have limited sources for your dinner after training and you're giving pizza, make sure that that recovery window was used optimally, okay? Now, these are good options to have after training or after a game. So you got your good sources of protein there. And again, your good whole grains, your pastas, your sweet potatoes, okay? Very, very easy options that could be made. So fresh chocolate milk, Avamore do a great protein milk at the minute, and you can get a couple of them, a couple of bottles of them if you can. Greek yogurt, a couple of oats. Really, really easy options, not asking too much, but simple ideas. Okay. Now, what's in the coach's bag? So as a coach, or maybe you talk to your manager about this, or if you're lucky enough to have somebody that's going to take over the nutrition on the team, you need to have foods with you in case of emergency, basically, okay? So you need to have your diuretytes, which are unbelievable. You need to have, these are really, really good. They're the Lucozade like gels. You can get a lot of gels. I like these ones. Again, if player is running low, energy is low during a game, you can have these on hand. Dried fruits are a great source of quick release energy, and excuse me, it saves you kind of carrying around fresh fruit, which could go off in the bottom of the bag, which I swear I've never done. Jaffa cakes, again, most underage teams, most people love Jaffa cakes, so they're a really, really good source of energy. Protein bars, oat bars. If you could have fresh fruit on the day, that'll be great, and some vegetables. Pretzel crisps are great. Even just pretzels, they're really, really low source in fat, and they're a good carbohydrate snack. You can get sachets of porridge, cans of tuna, nuts and seeds. Really, really good handy snack to have in your bag. And figs are great as well. Okay, they're also low in fat, high in carbohydrates. The one thing about all of these snacks, they can be taken on the plane. Okay, so these are all fine to take on the plane. I'm pretty sure cans of tuna are okay to be taken on the plane, but these should be in your bag. As a coach, you should be able to take care of your player. So if your player feels ill, is lightheaded, these are really, really good snacks to have in the bag, and they can stay in the bag for a couple of months, okay? And they may not go off. Just be careful about the tuna or the vegetables. So how to prep for away tournaments and trainings. And unfortunately, I'm not quite sure how the summer is going to go, but this is good information for you going forward. The best thing as a coach that you could do is prepare. So not only do you need to organize the flights, or if you have a manager, great, that can help you out with, or you need to organize where you're going to stay, you also should do these things. These things will add to your players' performance away, okay? You need to know what restaurants are close by. what shops are close by, and if they're going to be open late if training runs late. This is as well as going away out of the country. But if you've got training up in Belfast or down in Cork, you should do a bit of research. Google is your best friend. It doesn't take that long. You can see what menus there are for the restaurants that you're going to order from. You can send them to the team. You could pre-order good meals in case a lot of your players might eat poorly, and then you only have one option for them. Okay, if you are traveling and you need to be speaking with a hotel, hotels can be tricky, okay, but you need to be completely transparent with the hotel. Explain to them what's going on, explain what you need. So for example, breakfast, you could say, look, just going to have some eggs, some cold meats, an array of cereals, some milks, and whole grain breads. Simple as, okay. For breakfasts, or sorry, for lunch and dinners, just have like grilled meats, some salads, whole grains. Try keep sauces aside, like in a bowl if possible, and try have everything grilled or baked. Okay, and again, if you're traveling out of the country, shops that are local, bring non-perishable items like I have, like I've mentioned in the previous slide. Water is a big thing. We know where we should be able to drink water from, and we know probably where we can't drink water from. So if we can't drink water, we can't brush our teeth with it. We need to know where the shop is to know that we need to have enough, okay? And also know new foods. So your athletes are going away to play, perform. They don't want to be introduced to new foods that they don't know of, you don't know of, and it could potentially harm their performance. I'm sure you've all had history with athletes getting sick whilst away, which is why it's so important if you're bringing away a picky eater on your team, you have that bag full of snacks, full of food. If you're going to a shop over there, get breads, get peanut butters, jams, ham and cheese over there, so that if you have a player that can't eat any of the stuff that the hotel is giving them, they know that in the manager's room, say for example, there's an area where they can go, they can get extra food, and they can feed kind of what they like. Okay, how to create a good culture of eating habits. So it's all well and good me saying all this stuff to you and putting it all on you to implement to your team, but a lot of the players also may not listen to you about this certain stuff. They might feel sensitive about it. So an easy way to do it is that the managers and coaches pick an ambassador for the team. Now, it doesn't have to be the captain, but you might feel it's somebody that prides themselves in good nutrition, maybe always brings kind of healthy snacks, and they can be your ear to the ground if needed. So they can promote good chats about nutrition, speak to certain players, and they can report back to you. Okay, and it's really, really good that if they see something kind of not right, or they're at lunch with the whole team, you're kind of having a coaches meeting, and they notice somebody not eating or not eating enough, they might say it to you, and it kind of takes you away from the situation, so it doesn't look like you're prying if you feel uncomfortable about doing that. A good way to also create a good habit and a good kind of nutritional culture would be to implement games. So I've been on teams where you bring a healthy snack and you have to swap it with somebody else. So say for example, and have coaches, staff and managers involved, and everybody has to swap a healthy snack. So it implements that you're learning new snacks from everybody else, but also the players feel accountable. I have to give a good healthy snack to somebody. I'm not going to bring something rubbish, okay? You could also have a game where somebody cooks like bars or healthy protein bars, or tries new recipes and then brings them out. But it's just getting people involved, okay? And again, getting people involved, we want to get the parents involved as much as possible. So an email about training might involve, say for example, the length of training sessions, so that they know how much food to give their child. And also just say, look, training finishes at 5, but dinner won't be till 8:30. Make sure that Sarah or John has a snack for their protein recovery, and it just reminds the parents or whoever's looking after the child to add in more food to their lunch. So the coaches and the managers can promote a healthy nutrition atmosphere, and it's good if the coaches can also show that they're in on it too. Like if the players are all eating well, but the coaches are off getting X, Y, and Z. Yes, it's fine for some teams, but for some teams, they might look for the coaches for like advice and kind of goals and stuff like this. And if you see you know, sometimes it just doesn't align. And now I understand that's not possible in some teams, but it'd be great if you could, from the coaches, set a good example. I view nutrition as the sixth man on the floor. I think it's vitally important, as I've probably been very passionate about it talking to you guys here. But basketball is a highly demanding sport, and it relies on continuous bursts of energy. So for this energy, we need sufficient carbohydrate sources throughout, like leading up to it. Okay, it needs to be sufficient if you want to get the best out of your player. Okay, fatigue and poor nutrition can lead to poor performance for athletes and can make them more vulnerable also to injury, which is, as a coach, you do not want that at all. And we need to focus as much as possible, and we need to help our athletes as much as possible. Okay, and these are just certain little things that we could do as coaches and kind of implement a healthy nutrition culture. So with saying that, that is it, and I hope I didn't run through that too fast. So I don't know if Paul wants to ask any questions or anything, or if there was any questions.
Yeah, so fantastic, Hannah. And there's 2 late questions after coming in, but I had a bunch of stuff there myself. Couple of things, and probably from early in the presentation, you spoke about you know, digesting food in the hour after practices and games and stuff like that. So how long does it take for food to digest? And if they had a bad meal or didn't take the right stuff in, how quickly will that affect their performance in terms of days?
Okay, so it's very player specific. So the kind of general guidelines that have been put out there is that 4 hours you should have your last meal, like your last big meal. So it might be big, like pasta, mince, or your toast and eggs. And then that 4 hours gives you enough time to digest before the game. If the player is hungry, they can have a small snack an hour before the game. And then if they're still hungry, like a couple of jellies right before tip off would probably be the easiest thing to say to people. And then they would just be secure enough knowing that all their food has been digested before the game. And what were you saying? What was the other end of that question, leading up to it?
Yeah, so like so they have a long day, or they're leading up to their weekend's practice or school's event or something like that. So say, for example, they had a chipper on a Thursday night and they're playing on a Saturday. How quick does that chipper affect their performance? Is it like a 48-hour window? Is it a 24-hour window? Is it an immediate window? You know, just as a silly example.
Yeah. No, it's a good example. I always used to believe that it was 48 hours prior. To be honest, again, it's very individual specific, but it is definitely at least 24 hours, because there is things such as carbohydrate loading, and that's done 24 hours before the game. So I would concentrate, if you could concentrate on good nutrition for the whole week, then that would be great. But if not, definitely concentrate on the 24 hours prior, get enough water in, get like kind of ump up like your carbohydrate sources if you can. Again, that is very player specific, but at least 24 hours beforehand. Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic.
And then for a player, the day of would be to definitely increase carbohydrate sources, because as I said, like they are your best friend for energy. So if there's ever any player that doesn't eat carbohydrates, they need to change that right now, because for basketball, it's basically what your body lives on.
Brilliant. And then a question I kind of had, and then one came in here from Georgiego, in terms of the 20 grams protein. Is it weight specific, or sorry, is it that a definite intake, or does it depend on the person's body weight, size, and things like that?
So your whole protein intake for the day is your body weight multiplied by 1.2 to 2 kilograms. Okay, but that 1.2 to 2 is all specific of how much you're training and how much you need to recover by. But it's between 1.2 and 2. So if you could take your body weight, multiply it. So say, for example, it's 150. You have to eat 150 grams of protein in a day. And that is not 150 grams at one sitting. It's 20 grams, 20 to 30 grams max every couple of hours. So if we were to intake all 150 grams of protein, which would be a very large meal, we wouldn't take it in, we would just excrete it out in urea basically. So our body can't handle it. So that's why every couple of hours, like your snack should have a bit of protein in it, or your lunch, your snack, your dinner, to keep that levels always topped up.
Very good, very good. One question, it was very, I wouldn't say it was quite specific to international teams, but it was quite specific to long activities. And Pat Curran came in with one, and I had a question here also that obviously it's the same for, like, I mean, the Billy Kelly or those one-day events where there's 4, 5, 6 games in a day, same as school events on weekends where they could have 3, 4, 5 games on those compact tournaments. I'm assuming those sort of percentages and grams all relate to those as well.
Oh yeah, they do. I just kept saying international or Irish teams because I was just thinking about that when I was writing the presentation. But it's very, very important for players when you're training, and especially for young players, because for young players, they're probably not just playing basketball, they're playing all these other sports as well during the weekend. So they need to keep their fuel up for everything that's going. So say, for example, like a Billy Kelly where you have maybe 3 games in one day, you need to replenish with carbohydrates for your energy for the next game, but you need to try and put in a little bit of protein so that you're recovering slightly before you go again. But that's with every sport. And if you're training 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, till at like 8 to 10, the meal afterwards, you should recover with your protein and then build up with your carbohydrates.
Yeah, I guess I was always kind of told it's like driving the car. So when you drive long distance, you lose fuel. In order to keep going for that distance, you got to top up the fuel. And I suppose it's just a simple little analogy, but that's kind of it. I've heard you say before, Hannah, and I've coined it and I've utilized it. You cannot outrun the fork. So can you explain that to people, please?
Yeah, I use this quite a lot. You cannot outrun a bad diet, basically. If you were to fuel yourself, it's kind of going back to your fuel example. If you had a Ferrari, would you put really, really poor petrol or really crappy diesel in it? Probably not. You probably put the best in it to get the best out of it. I don't know a lot about cars, but I feel like that would be the same example. If you're wanting to play at the best, why would you fuel yourself with bad food leading up to it? It just doesn't make sense. Your input is what you get out. So if you fuel yourself with sugary drinks, with chocolate, with crisps, all of the time, I'm not saying like treat yourself every day if you want at nighttime, that kind of thing. Once every so often is fine. But if you're eating processed food over and over and over again, it's going to catch up with you. You're not going to be able to perform to your best ability. Simple as. If you could eat the best foods for you that you know are going to fuel yourself, you're going to get the best out of you. And as a coach, if you can kind of implement that into your players, you know that you're going to get the best out of your players.
Very good, very good. I'm going to try and maybe add a question for you and Niall at the same time. And you spoke about culture in terms of your diet. And then if we can link that into a competitive culture with what Niall did, how would that work? So maybe an answer from yourself and Niall on that one.
I think it would work excellently if you could build a competitive culture, but then implement good nutrition into it, and the two would go like hand in hand. If you could be the best competitor you could be, you can be that by fueling yourself with good nutrition. It would help you be the best competitor that you could be, would be my take on it.
Excellent.
I don't know how to do it.
I missed a little bit of it there while I was switching over. I kind of lost it, but I assume what we're talking about is how we put nutrition into the same. But to me, nutrition is every bit a part of the evaluation system I was talking about. If you're not fueling your body correctly, as Hannah's alluded to throughout that presentation, you can't play at your optimum. And if any player, any athlete that wants to be successful, they need to be competitive and moving forward in a direction, and that includes what you eat. And I suppose what I've taken from this presentation with Hannah is that it's a progressive strategy. You're not looking to go from 0 to 100. You're looking to formulate good eating habits over time. So there is a way of evaluating that, and there is a way of implementing a strategy, in my opinion, to improve that.
Fantastic. So guys, I am thoroughly excited that we've got through this tonight.
Woo!
I'm thrilled that we've had so many people on. We've had anything from 80 to 85 attendees throughout the event. So I'm thrilled that the Irish public and the Irish basketball community are getting something out of this and things like that. So I don't see any more questions. However, there was a smart comment came in there, Hannah, behind you, that your clock isn't working. So you might.
No, it's
Yeah. So yeah, so we can still have a bit of fun and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, so guys, you were absolutely amazing. I think you've given everybody a bit of food for thought, pardon the pun. And I'm excited for tomorrow night, where we're going to have Carl Kilbride, who I need to give a big shout out to for providing this platform and helping us get there and go to webinar for saving our week webinars. So thank you very much for that. So Carl will speak on 5-out offense tomorrow, and then Aaron O'Connell is going to talk about mindfulness for sport, which I think is going to be a really interesting thing on where we can go with that with coaches and players. So guys, thanks for tuning in. Again, like I said last night, everybody stay safe, do all the things our professionals are asking us to do, and hopefully we can get through this and be back on the floor and implementing all these strategies and stuff for our players.